Hello everyone and welcome to BearNews as we take a look at the final installment of the strategy gaming trilogy, Total War Warhammer 3. And as the final installment, this game is set to conclude the ever-expanding map of the mortal realms of the Warhammer world and the immortal realms of the Chaos Gods themselves. From campaigns to battles, CA has promised multiple improvements across the board for the finale of this trilogy. But with that said, just what do we know about Total War Warhammer 3? Taking a look at the Q&A on June the 18th, we also have additional information surrounding Warhammer 3 in response to community questions. Now, some of these answers were of course simple "we cannot say yet." For example, the option of a manual toggle between flying and landing for flying units. We also get some great information surrounding difficulties. For any of those who've seen my video on difficulties within Total War, you will have noticed that the majority of people who responded on YouTube and over on Reddit played the game with the battle difficulty lower than that of the campaign difficulty. And we can see straight away on this Q&A that the melee bonuses afforded to the AI have been reduced. It seems that even CA has acknowledged the general lack of balance when it came to these confrontations. Something that as a long-time player of legendary difficulty, I really do hope will promote more players to give it a try on those higher difficulties and really see what the game is like when you bump up that challenge. Now, just before we move on to the more faction-specific notes, I'm going to pick out a couple of the key details. There will be no extreme unit size, something that I'm not particularly bothered by, but I'm sure many a player will be, given that the grandeur of this game will be slightly less than it could potentially have been. We also see a little more clarification in how the scaling will work in terms of damage. Direct damage, healing, single entity weapons, and projectile strength, and magical missile damage will now scale with unit sizes. Something that will once more help that overall balance and increase the accessibility to this game. The requirement for better and better computers does come in, so being able to drop it down to smaller sizes on lower graphical settings and still have a pleasurable experience will be greatly appreciated. As although for now they haven't shown the system requirements, no doubt they are going to be pretty beefy indeed. Moving on to the factions, we get a great hint of how Kislev will play, with a more hybrid-focused roster, and something I was incredibly happy to see, being more dependable at holding a line and fighting until the bitter end. While of course playing a huge factor in the Total War franchise, and simply having units that can move forward and hold the line, giving you more time to move your flanking units into position and crush the enemy utterly. And something I was a little disappointed to see is that, owing to changes in development, there will not be different types of bear cavalry, at least in terms of the unit being different. Instead, the brown bears we've seen in some footage have now been changed into white bears since their creation. I really do hope they actually go back and bring both of them together into a single unit, just to give it a bit more variety, and having nothing linked to yours truly, as well as dashing our hopes of flying polar bears. Maybe one day. Now, taking a look at Khorn, we get some great insights into how their armies work. For starters, we have confirmation of battle resources which can be spent to fire off one of 3 army abilities, meaning you will actually have some control over how and when you use these abilities, as opposed to prior races such as Dark Elves, which simply automatically happened once you hit a certain threshold. It's a nice little change to a prior mechanic, but if we continue on, we can also see that Dark Elf style threshold ability coming in with units themselves, with individual units gaining passive abilities that scale in intensity depending on the blood they have shed for the Blood God. Even if these are minimal buffs, it does really apply to the flavor of a Khorn army, as well as providing some kind of boon to help out against their bane of a lack of magic, with Khorn, for those who don't know, having a particular disdain for magic users. Finally, we do have some information on campaign gameplay. And a big one to note is that the brand new Chaos factions will not have access to the legendary lords of the original Chaos Warriors DLC. Personally, I would say this makes sense to a certain extent, given how that was essentially Chaos Undivided, whereas these are factions pledged to a specific Chaos god. Though as it states here, no, at least not for Warhammer 3 release, it will be interesting to see how they are incorporated into the brand new factions. And the last one I'll bring up is that Khorn will not be a Horde faction. Yes, this Chaos faction at least will be able to conquer different regions. A very large change from the original, and something that will be a real game changer coming into Total War Warhammer 3. Well, coming over to their blog, we have some rather interesting information released on June 22nd. Various mechanics introduced in Total War Warhammer 2 for specific factions, such as the Dark Elf, Greenskin, and Tomb Kings, will now be available to far more factions moving on, with in-battle resources now becoming a commodity to all armies, at least in terms of survival battles if I'm reading this correctly, but also introducing its ability to be tinkered with by the modding community. Something that no doubt has plenty of both players and modders highly anticipating this introduction. They haven't explicitly said how all races or all factions will have access to these in-battle currencies. They will remain separate from individual faction currencies, meaning that if you're playing as the Dark Elves and enough participants of a battle snuff it to gain their buffs, you will be able to do so without affecting the supplies of survival battles, which, as we will see later, allow you to bring in reinforcements, replenish your ammunition, and enact various other additional buffs or even constructions upon a battle map, with plenty more still to come. Now, something to note right here is that this is an official statement by CA on the Total War blog. They have tweaked coding in an effort to improve gameplay and balancing. Something they reiterate in multiple parts of this blog to really suggest that they've taken on board the imbalance of Warhammer 2, a game either famous or notorious depending on how you look at it, for the power creep of Skaven, all of which in an effort to make the races and legendary lords a little more on par at the beginning of Warhammer 3's journey into the wondrous land of DLC. Now, something that I was rather interested with is that some of these tweaks have allowed them to expand upon the various mechanics already present within the game. In particular, the mention of Katarine's Heart of Winter spell, which is a 4-phased ability. Something that, given the sheer amount of phases required to set it off, is no doubt going to be incredibly powerful, while opening the door for other such factions, giving them access to multi-phased abilities themselves. Now, given how most of these changes are something that players won't really interact with or see directly, one of the things that did stand out to me was this single entity wounds and unit size scaling. For those of you who don't know, single entities in Warhammer and Warhammer 2 will retain their damaging abilities all the way until the end of their life, meaning that a unit with 1 health is just as powerful as a unit that's at full strength. Something that they've changed now by introducing a wounded state, meaning that a unit will gain stat debuffs as it gets lower on its health. They did further qualify this by saying healing them will remove those debuffs, but the fact that your characters won't be able to dish out quite as much damage throughout the entirety of a match is really going to change how players interact with those single entity units. And the big one of the unit scaling. Now, if you've only played Total War Warhammer 1 or 2 on the same unit scaling, then you may not be aware that the damage output is identical no matter how large the unit is. Meaning that if you're using small unit sizes, and your monstrous creature, being unable to reduce its unit size as unit entity size is 1, will have to reduce its health, making it far more susceptible to enemy attacks, as it will still receive the same amount of damage despite having less health to deal with it. This could be particularly well seen when sieging, as towers would deal incredible damage knocking out units fairly quickly on the lower unit sizes. Moving on, we see some of the art direction for the new maps introduced in Total War Warhammer 3. Now, on its own, this is a lovely picture, and I can't help but feel this will be more of a backdrop than an actual place that we engage in combat, but something they have noticed in here is they're introducing more verticality to their maps, as well as more areas where you'll be unable to move. This can be seen with a statement of there being more hard collision than before, as terrain types will be more hostile within the new campaign. Something that could turn quite interesting as natural choke points evolve within the battle maps themselves, especially considering they are increasing the amounts of crossings, which will prevent players from using those clear chokeholds built into the maps themselves. Now, something to note before we leave is they have introduced the Three Kingdoms ambush withdrawal feature, something that I've really longed for in all Total War games, as it is so incredibly useful to get out of those ambush battles, forcing your units to run past the enemy, sacrificing a few and getting out of there while keeping the bulk of your army intact. And something that's become far more important in Total War Warhammer 2 thanks to so many different factions automatically entering ambush stance upon the campaign map. Yes, once more, Skaven, we are looking at you. But of course, if you're not wanting to, you've always had the option in Total War to engage in auto-resolve. Now, the auto-resolve feature has long been finicky at best within the Total War games. And within this blog, we see a promise of an improvement to the predictability of the results, as well as additional information by indicating to the player a rough idea of what units will be lost when engaging in an auto-resolve. It makes it far easier and far more likely that players will take upon an auto-resolve option, as they have a far better chance of knowing actually what will be left in their army in its wake. And given I, as many others no doubt, have hit auto-resolve only for half of our forces to be instantly wiped out, this is certainly something that will improve the Total War franchise immeasurably henceforth. Now, I should note there is additional information on this blog about quest battles, survival battles, and various changes to the UI, and I'd highly recommend you going to check it out yourselves, and so I'll be leaving a link in the description for anyone who wishes to do so. Taking a look at the announcement teaser trailer, we get some great indications of what will be in the game. Not only do we get some of the motivations behind the characters and why they fight, though to be fair, if you know anything about Warhammer, everyone's at war. You don't really need much more than that. But we do get to see the Chaos Gods. Nurgle, the Lord of Pestilence. Slaanesh, the Prince and Princess of Pleasure. Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways. And Khorn, the Lord of Skulls. Now, the focus so far has predominantly been on Khorn and showing off their units, with the others yet to be revealed. But when we see our cavalry charge, we get to know just how devastating these new units will be. But Bloodthirsters, the greater demons, some of the strongest units that Chaos can muster, are going to be the largest problems to overcome. That's great seeing these tough, strong units at play. You do have to wonder just what will be happening on the campaign. How will they balance all these out? Before we end, we get a great look at what I still maintain is the legend of Total War, checking out the campaign map of Grand Cathay. Now, Grand Cathay has been present in the lore of Warhammer for decades at this point, but we haven't actually seen any official models brought out from Games Workshop. So CA really is going to be setting a precedent in this game to the brand new units to be introduced into the Warhammer fantasy world. We do know enough about them in terms of the fluff, having plenty of magical abilities, with the Jade Lions being the standout units for me. Of course, with a full roster yet to be released, it'll be down to CA and Games Workshop coming together and collaborating to really bulk out their forces, get to know exactly what Cathay is capable of. And skipping on to their gameplay trailer, they've really only been showing us features from the survival battles that have been introduced with Warhammer 3. Now, these horde-like battles are based around the incursions into the realms of chaos. Your aims are simple in claiming victory points, allowing you to upgrade your units, as well as, of course, dealing damage to the enemy and surviving as you press forward. Now, as you're battling, you'll gain resources which you can use to bring in reinforcements or improve your units or even heal them and replenish their ammunition. Something that's going to be quite important, and taking a look at some content creators who were given early access to them, it definitely seems like you'll have to plan for these when you do your gaming sessions to ensure you have enough time to actually finish them. And when we look at the constructions introduced, it's actually pretty standard for Total War, going back to previous games when you set up your settlement defenses, allowing you to place traps, construct barricades so as to funnel your opponents or slow up their advance, but also being able to bring in towers is going to be a pretty good bonus, as you'll be able to cause some serious damage on the enemy, towers always being kind of overpowered in Total War. So something I've noticed looking at multiple YouTubers and all the different videos they've released, as well as looking at the official releases by CA, you do have armor and you can upgrade this. However, I have not been able to actually see the difference between the different levels of armor in the units, with almost every single unit shown being at the second or silver shield level. It will be nice to see actually what the difference in visuals are between different levels of armor upgrade. Though even without that, just having those general upgrades of the historic system brought into Warhammer is something really great to see and harkens back to the classic styles of Total War back in the days of Medieval 2. I'm curious to see how much of that is implemented in the campaign map. We have seen it in these battles and it definitely looked good, but how much of that will transfer? Will we be able to keep those upgrades when we then move back onto the campaign map? Or will we be able to upgrade before we enter these battles and really show up with top strength? Seeing as the developers have mentioned that the third level, your golden tier armor and weaponry, is going to give some pretty beefy bonuses. I wouldn't be surprised if you can only get the first 2 in campaign, and the third you'll have to claim when you go into these survival battles. Now, as we go on in the battle, we get a look at some of the more diverse units in the Kislev roster. In particular, we see just how many of their units are indeed hybrids, allowing you to fire upon the enemy and engage in combat to a pretty decent degree, holding the line and causing damage on these demons as they do. And of course, we get to check out some of the single entity units. Giant bombarding cannons pulled by bears. You literally can't get better than that. Heading to the final battle of the Exalted Bloodthirster and the Great Elemental Bear, I would like to say the scale is astounding. Bloodthirsters on the tabletop are absolutely massive, and in the fluff even bigger. So for an Elemental Bear to tower over it, that is going to be quite a spectacle to behold. There you have it, everything I've been able to learn about Warhammer 3. There's been plenty of advances on the battlefield, and definitely a lot said about the campaign map, though very little shown as of yet. But what do you think? What are you looking forward to in Total War Warhammer 3? Which faction do you most want to try? And just how many bears will you be recruiting? But leave a comment, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Till then, as always, peace out.